Welcome to day 2 of Agenda 2022, the Pearson Centre Fall Conference on the priorities the new government and Parliament need to be addressing in 2022 and beyond. In this session, we will focus on the caring agenda. My name is Andrew Cardozo and I'm president of the Pearson Centre. I want to start by recognizing that the Pearson Centre is headquartered on the traditional lands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples, and we welcome our speakers and audience who are joining us from across Turtle Island. As you may know, the Pearson Centre is a leading progressive think tank that addresses the challenging economic and social issues of the day. We make a point of inviting people from all parties, from business, labor, and various other civil society groups and other experts. As we like to say, we bring people and ideas together. A special thank you to all our donors, including some of you who are on today, and our sponsors, especially Canada's Building Trades Unions, the International Association of Firefighters, and AMAPCO, Ontario's professional employees. The gold sponsor for this conference is Bruce Power, and a special thank you as well to Mr. Charles Coffey. Just briefly on the format, following a discussion with the panel for about 45 minutes, we will take questions from you, the audience. So please send in your questions on the question box on your screen, and we will get to as many as we can towards the end of the session. And we will end at 12 noon Eastern time. So today we have a wonderful panel of Canadians who work in various fields and have always addressed different ways and different aspects of the caring agenda. Jane Bertrand is the program director for the Margaret and Wallace McCain Family Foundation, which focuses on early childhood education. She's replacing the Honorable Margaret Norrie McCain. She is replacing the Honourable Margaret Norrie McCain, who was not able to join us this morning. Jane is also an adjunct professor at OISE, University of Toronto. She was a professor at the Early Childhood program at George Brown College, where she initiated a bachelor's degree in early childhood leadership. Sheila Reguer is the founding member of the Basic Income Canada Network and has been chairperson since 2014. She was also executive director of the National Council of Welfare. Her career in the federal public service before that included being a Canadian negotiator at several United Nations World Conferences on gender equality and social development. She chaired the UN negotiations on poverty and on unpaid work. Senator Kim Pate returns to the Pearson Centre for popular demand. Great to have you back, Senator. She was appointed to the Senate in 2016. She's a nationally renowned advocate who has spent nearly 40 years working in and around the legal and penal system in Canada with some of the most marginalized, victimized, criminalized, and institutionalized people. In the last couple of years, she's also become a leading proponent of a national basic income program for all Canadians. Delighted to have Scott Sims, who was a Liberal Member of Parliament for the Newfoundland and Labrador riding of Coastal Bay's Central Notre Dame for 17 years, from 2004 to 2021. I'll just point out that in his riding, there's the city of Gander, which has a long history in itself, but it is also the location of where the great Broadway musical Come From Away is staged and is about. He served in various capacities, including being chairperson of the House of Commons committees on fisheries and oceans and on Canadian heritage most recently. So let's get to the discussion. I want to put forward a proposition to the panel, which covers a lot of things, and here it goes. That Canada should get the national early childhood education and childcare system in place in short order, and set out medium-term plans for better seniors care, pharma care, mental health care, dental care, and basic income. So those are some of the main elements of what a caring agenda would be. Some people find that very reassuring. Some people would say there's no way we can do all of this, we can't afford it. So here it goes, I'll just mention the elements again. Childcare, better seniors care, pharma care, mental health care, dental care, and basic income. So we'll start with early childhood education and childcare. And I'll ask you, Jane Bertrand, to comment on that. Is it all done? Or do we have to now, can we move on to something else? Is it all taken care of? Where are we at?
We're at the beginning of a decade of a lot of hard work. Was public health care done in 1962, 63 when it first came on the scene? No, we're still evolving. So we've taken a huge step forward for early childhood education, and I would argue that all of the components you put forward are important as part of a caring agenda. And certainly early childhood education is an essential component of that array of things that you mentioned. So I don't think it's all done. We've taken a huge, big, not step, a huge leap forward in the past year, but it's been 50 years getting there. Since the Royal Commission on the Status of Women raised it in I was just starting out then. Thinking about this as a career when that first came along. And here we are, and it's important, it's big, we can do a lot with it, but we're just at the very beginning of execution, and that's an important part. I'll stop there. I mean, I've got more to say about all of the benefits, why it's important, return of them, blah, blah, blah. But I'll stop there, and I'd like to listen to the other panelists for a moment. You're muted.
I'll just ask you one more question, though. So what we have is federal provincial agreements in, I think it's 13 or 15 jurisdictions, Ontario and New Brunswick being the main ones who haven't signed on yet. And then it will take a few years for this to happen. Just one question for you. You mentioned that the issue of national childcare was first recommended 50 years ago in the Royal Commission on the Status of Women. It seems to me just in the last couple of years, the debate changed, and for the first time, the national debate was not only was it a matter of women's rights, but it was so the guys got a sense that it was also an economic issue and was really of importance to the economy and everybody.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, no, I mean, we're at the point, we had announcements, we had the budget with a significant commitment to 5 years of funding, $30 billion. And we have the evolving agreements, the early learning and childcare bilateral agreements. We have 4 jurisdictions not signed yet. The other 9 have signed. Nunavut, Northwest Territories, Ontario, and New Brunswick. And those agreements are important, and they get us going on, and each one has to be tailored to that region's realities, and there's lots of learnings that will happen across boundaries, but that's part of the execution challenge will be that. Hopefully we'll see the other 4 sign on soon. There'll be legislation coming down the road. That's been promised by the federal government that this will be embedded in legislation so that it is an ongoing commitment, not over in 5 years. So yeah, no, we have made huge step forward, and part of it is we've all been working on it for 50 years, many of us from many places, and then it's like it all came together. The earlier study 4, I've worked with Margaret McCain and Fraser Mustard on earlier study 1, 2, and 3 since 1999, and the 4th one came out about 3 weeks before pandemic hit. And it recommended this kind of a commitment, this kind of going forward. And we thought we were being really brave and ambitious by what we put forward. And much of what we put forward has come to fruition. But we're also realizing there's a lot of work in execution. So that's where we're at now. We need to watch those agreements, how they're executed, and keep the dialogue going.
Okay, thank you. Sheila Reguera, you've been working on issues of welfare, women's equality over a number of years. What are your thoughts today as we see where things are at, as Jane has just outlined?
This is fascinating that Jane has started out talking about the Royal Commission on the Status of Women, because both it and its partner, the Kroll Commission, in that era, both recommended a basic income as well. I did work briefly on the childcare file inside the federal government in the early 1980s when we had figured out pretty much everything that needed to be known, and it's taken this long. So it's really exciting to see all of that work coming to fruition across the country. It's been really hard. I think some people may wonder, first, what is a basic income and what does it have to do with the CARE agenda? So if I can take just a couple of minutes, I think for Canadians, the best way of describing a basic income is not theoretical, but very practical. It is essentially what we provide for seniors, take away the age limit, make sure that that financial security is there for everybody. And for the 18 to 64-year-old group that isn't covered, because this is the prime working age population, you want to design it so that employment is rewarded as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
What a basic income also does, though, and like I'm really excited about this link to the caring agenda, because I think as we all realize, there's a continuum of care that's needed in society and across families. And most of our policy has been based on the idea of an economy that's run for employment, for profit, for production. And anything related to nature and nurture has been kind of sidelined. So things like childcare, things like maternity benefits, like we've been moving forward slowly on some of those things, but ensuring that there's financial security for everybody so they can combine all of those parts of their lives and really focus on, you know, the underpinning of care that makes everything else work.
Yeah. Senator Kincaid, we'll come back to basic income in a little more detail in a few minutes, but I just want to get your sense of the caring agenda. As a senator, you, as an independent senator, you have to really think and understand every single issue that comes before the Senate, and you can sort of pass it on to your colleagues, because you have to make sure you know every bill that every issue that comes before you. What are your thoughts about the overall caring agenda?
I think it's vitally important. In fact, it's the entire reason I was even interested when I was approached about by the folks who wanted to put my name forward for the Senate. I had spent, as you indicated, the better part of my paid and unpaid working life working with folks who every other system failed or refused to serve. And so the only place that couldn't say no to them were our prisons. And so you saw people with mental health issues, you saw people who had been in the child welfare system, you saw people who were living in poverty and trying to navigate on totally unhospitable streets. And so when we look at things like the TRC, I won't repeat what Sheila and Jane have already mentioned, because yes, this 50 years ago, a caring agenda, if you will, was recommended by many. It wasn't followed. Instead, we went on an austerity plan that went on steroids, in my humble opinion, and became really mean-spirited after 9/11, and took on the complete antithesis of a caring agenda, if I can put it that way. And it was all out for individualistic, capitalistic, basically, if you don't pull yourself up by your bootstraps, that's your fault and you deserve what you get. And I think we're now in a point, and the pandemic really brought this home for folks who weren't aware of it before, or maybe it wasn't in their consciousness before, that unless we're all okay, we're not, and especially those who have the least, then we're not all going to be okay. And in fact, the health issues and the economic issues have really shown that to be true. And so I think we're in a moment, I hope we don't miss it. I see, us starting to veer off of this, but between climate issues, between poverty, global poverty, between the global health crises, I think we have an opportunity to really turn this around and create a future for the generations to come that right now looks pretty darn bleak to many of the young people I speak with.
Yeah. Scott Sims, your thoughts? You've been a member of Parliament for 17 years, so you've, with your constituents, have dealt with all these issues. What are your thoughts about the caring agenda and how we go about it?
I have absolutely so many, after 17 years, could prove that To be honest, I think one of the biggest issues in 17 years that come to my office was essentially poverty. And it started with primarily seniors poverty in this situation. So I have a lot of thoughts about basic income, but I come at it in a sense of learning because I've not been schooled as such in basic income. But I want to go back to the issue about childhood education or early childhood education. I started in 2004, and it was only a year later when Paul Martin started signing agreements with provinces, and in much the same way that it is right now. And it was a fantastic conversation because one of the things we realized was that you have a myriad of issues that share jurisdiction between both national and subnational. And in our particular situation, we have carved in Newfoundland and Labrador and a unique existence when it comes to the delivery of the caring agenda, and ECE is a prime example. What we realized was that the vast majority of early childhood education, which, by the way, we call it now, thank goodness, in those days, it was just called child care, something akin to what was considered babysitting. And that was the language that was used then. Thankfully, we have graduated to ECE terminology because I think that the biggest aspect that Paul Martin's exercise encapsulated and brought to Canadians was the fact that the value of an early childhood educator who had been pretty much non-existent other than the fact that, oh, you look after kids during the day. So you make sure they're fed and that's about it. Not true at all. And these are highly educated people who were making very little money and in many cases still do. So the vast majority of that was delivered to the private sector and they could only absorb so much. So that was one of the challenges. The other challenge is the fact that it was rural. So when you start talking about models, which are wonderful in the sense that the public takes on a public ECE center, similar to the way our school systems are run. So that's not junior kindergarten, but that's below that. It becomes problematic because Gander, yes, can provide this kind of center for the people of Gander, which population base is 10,000 or slightly more. But really, Gander serves in excess of 50,000 people over a large area of land. That becomes problematic when you only have one center. The whole point of the story is that when these policies find their way to the bottom level or to the level of execution, it becomes problematic, especially for the federal government, because some of it gets nuanced away from what the intention was at the beginning, which is to be part of a caring agenda. We've heard the expression before, you've fallen through the cracks. That is true. I have all kinds of advice on how to get around that, one of those being private members' bills, but that's probably for a whole other discussion. But yes, ECE is a prime example about how a lot of care has to be not only at the end use, which is to provide the care for people, but to be careful in how you implement to make sure that you encapsulate most people.
Yeah, Scott, let me start with you on the next topic I'd like to raise, which is seniors care. In the Liberal platform, you promised to have a national standard across the country. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it would work?
Yeah. So this is going to sound somewhat cynical, but when you have broad strokes such as those, and you want to have a certain standard, I fully believe in that. And I think our healthcare in this country and the Healthcare Act actually stands up as an example of the basic 5 principles. To me, most important is universality, right? Everyone's eligible to, receive the benefit of what is being promised. For seniors, I think this is a good goal to use because what you can do is you can gauge whether these smaller programs work. I'll give you 2 examples. Number one, the GIS, the Guaranteed Income Supplement. A lot of people don't realize that a Guaranteed Income Supplement not only provides extra money for those who are impoverished and only can rely on the basics of CPP or not even old age security. So the GIS tops you up. The other thing that GIS provides is that provincially, it makes you now eligible for the provincial drug plan. That's a big deal because it's such for instance, if people take out RSPs that they've invested in for years. Now all of a sudden they find themselves below a certain level of money, and therefore they're no longer eligible for their drug coverage. That's a big deal. We've been trying so hard to tell people, if you take your RSPs out and you're on old age security or GIS in particular, please call us. Please call your MP, because there are ramifications that a lot of people don't understand. The reason why I tell you that as an illustration is because if you have a national care standard by which it's not reliant on an actual number, which a lot of our seniors are falling through the cracks because they're relying on this certain amount of income that is only available for them, either above or below. But if they have national standards, then they will see that even though they overqualify, their current living situation is below that standard, and that has to be addressed. I don't mean to be, I'm not trying to blur the situation, but I think it becomes blurry when you take these wonderful, great standards and you impose them upon a particular part of the population that doesn't benefit when they should benefit.
Right. Senator Pate, I wonder if you just have a quick thought on seniors, on the standards for seniors care across the country. Some provinces will push back and say none of your business, leave it to us. What's your thought about what the federal government should be doing?
Well, again, I think we're in an opportune time. The incredible losses we saw and the spread of COVID during the pandemic revealed a bunch of things. One, that going for-profit care for seniors has actually yielded, and even not for profit, but providing resources, has yielded some pretty horrific results for our elderly. And so I think that there's an opportunity now to take what were essentially national guidelines during the income supports that were provided by the federal government during the pandemic and create the types of principled national standards that we need in not just this area. And I agree with Scott that we need to look at regional differences, and then, of course, the provinces and territories need to be, and First Nations leadership for that matter, need to be involved in this. And on a personal level, my mom died in a senior's home during this pandemic, not of COVID, but really because one of the things we learned that I was shocked to learn, and I pay attention to these things, was that the business models of most seniors' homes are based on 25 to 30% of the labor being done by family members or friends of those who are in. And so my mom got a sore that wasn't discovered and ended up dying of a horrible infection. And that would have been detected if we were still going in every day the way that my father and my sisters and I were doing, to help provide that care. But I didn't realize it was actually part of the business plan. I also know that many of the workers who were supposed to get wage subsidies didn't yet receive those wage subsidies by the time my mom died, and many yet they were paying out shareholders of the company, the American company that was the owner. So I think, and the PBO report today about the tax breaks still being provided to fossil fuel developing companies, the fact that our banks and our richest people have made so much money, all of this, I think we have to do some income redistribution. And that, I think that's long overdue as well, in addition to the national standards. And I think we can fund it if we do it in a way that does income distribution in a way that actually generates economic growth. And we know that for every, just like in childcare, for every dollar invested, you yield $7 of savings down the road in healthcare and criminal legal system and all the rest. For every dollar invested in things like the child benefit, the GIS, you actually generate, I forget what the number is now, Sheila will correct me if I've got it wrong, but at least $2 to $3 of economic development or economic stimulation, because people who don't have a lot of money, guess what they're doing with that money? They're spending it in the economy. They're not putting it in tax havens. And the other thing, particular bugaboo for me is the fact that Canada is one of the leading money laundering countries. I think we need to end that. Why, we don't want to be the place that people can come and launder ill-gotten gains, much less allow people to to take their money, make billions of dollars. And today, one of the issues I'm speaking to is Senator Galvez's motion around climate emergency. And I was shocked to find, as I was doing the research for this, that in the last 25 years, 50% of the global emissions have been created by the less than 50% have been created by the poorest 50% in the country, and 25% have been created by the richest people. And during this pandemic, many of them bought and used private jets when commercial. I didn't know that. Why? Well, I'm not flying in those circles. No pun intended. And so, I think we need to be looking at those economic redistribution, and the reinvigoration of the Law Commission, I think, provides an opportunity to do that. We haven't usually had tax reform looked at by the Law Commission, but why not? And we could also look at, writ large, this whole CARE agenda. How do we actually implement it in a way that is not siloed, but actually looks at all of these issues together?
Yeah, and now on basic income, you have been a leader among the senators. There's a group of, I believe, 50 at one point that you had gotten to sign on in favor of basic income. One of the opportunities, it seemed, was in Prince Edward Island, where the government of Prince Edward Island was interested in having a pilot project for the entire province. Is that what you'd like to see? And can you tell us a little bit about what your group of senators are planning going forward?
Sure. Well, the 50 of us wrote just near the beginning of the pandemic when CERB was implemented and said, look, you're doing basically a form of basic income, only for those people who are working before. You still left out 3.5 to 5 million people, depending on what poverty line or index you use. So let's pivot to that. That was not accepted. But the PEI government, Newfoundland and Labrador too, has been looking at this. Yukon has been as well. But PEI passed an all-party motion and had a study, and they're ready to go. They want to pilot implementation in Canada. I think of it as much the way we saw the Medicare system piloted, if you will, or introduced in Saskatchewan. And then while all the naysayers said, oh, it's too expensive, we'll never be able to do it, once it was implemented in Saskatchewan, everybody wanted in. And I think it's going to be much the same. Everybody who works with people who, as Scott and Sheila and Jane have said, who works with people who are living below the poverty line knows what you need is resources. And when you provide those, people, all the research shows, all the evidence shows, people's lives show that they use that money, they try to get ahead, whether it's the Dauphin or the Ontario basic income model. And so we're actually saying, let's demonstrate the rollout. Let's not have another pilot project, but let's demonstrate the rollout. Let's start with PEI. It's a small province. Everybody's on side. During the pandemic, 1 in 4 of those in PEI had to go to a food bank, had to rely on food bank for food security. Yeah. Let's do it. And so they're ready to go. The only ones not coming to the table yet are the feds.
Okay, and just to clarify my comment earlier, it's not PEI is not looking at a pilot project, it's looking at actually doing it.
Yeah, piloting demonstration.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll jump in here on a couple of comments. First of all, is that okay, Andrew?
Yeah, please do, Jane. Go ahead.
First of all, absolutely agree with you, Scott. It's not a one size fits all. Everything is center based in a town. The notion of early childhood education can be delivered in a number of ways and spaces and places, including well-supported home childcare or family childcare. And you've got some good examples of where that's been done very well and well supported in Newfoundland and Labrador. So that has to be part of the mix, and it varies across the country, but it's not a one size fits all. I do think we should start with the child. There are huge benefits for families, for parents, for income, closing income gaps for women. Absolutely, no doubt about it. But let's start with the children and make it a right of all children, regardless of what their parents are doing, so that those children who have parents who can't, are unable to work for a variety of issues, have access just as they do when they're 6 years old and they go into grade 1. So that's one part. Let's make that, we've got a Canada-wide early learning and childcare system in development. And early learning and childcare is early childhood education organized so it can support a variety of ways in which parents work or pursue other educational opportunities or meet other needs. And if we think about it that way, we've got to lead with the child, ensure that it's high quality, and that does mean qualified educators. That's our route to quality, so that we get the benefits from kids as they grow older. It pays for itself and then some. Reduce special education needs, dramatically reduced, improved high school outcomes. It goes on and on and on. And there's an avalanche, multiple lines of evidence that point to this. So I won't get into that, but we need to make sure it benefits kids and the kids have access to it. We don't need to make it targeted so that kids are stigmatized. We need to make it more universal so all kids can participate. The vulnerable kids who need extra efforts and supports will benefit more from such a system. They do that when it's universal. That's best achieved when it's universal. It is an investment that pays back, and it's already been referenced. There's multiple studies that show us that. So let's get on with it. And we've never needed it more than we need it now, because we need all hands on deck 10 years from now and 20 years from now, and we need to start that with a high quality early childhood education. And I couldn't agree more about the workforce issue, Scott. Yeah, we've got to, that is as important as the affordability crunch for parents.
Yeah. Sheila, I wonder if you could just comment on, if I can use the word, intersectionality between basic income and childcare. We've got some common goals on both fronts, and there's a connection on the objectives, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it's an incredible connection across the objectives. I think there are all sorts of intersectionalities here. But as Scott was talking, and Jane and others too, what also struck me is that it's really important that in a national kind of framework for a caring agenda that we understand who does what best. Otherwise, you get all sorts of perverse interactions. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with our income security systems, the way we've got now, is that we treat different people in different age groups and different categories very differently. And going back to my old National Council of Welfare hat, where we analyzed and reported on these things, social assistance rules change all the time. The way you get in and out changes all the time. There are perverse interactions constantly that confound people's lives and make it really, really hard to get by. So very simplistically, to me, like, the federal government is really good at collecting and distributing money. Just do that. The services and the interaction between income and services then needs to be sorted out. If you have an effective financial security system for everybody, then you can figure out how to do services better, how you really get to people who need them, so that you're providing services not because they're poor, but because they need childcare or need elder care or need something else. So I think that's one thing. I just wanted to say, I had an experience with my mother similar to Kim's, who died just before COVID. And I was absolutely stunned by how inflexible the system was. And if it weren't, excuse me, if it weren't for my sister and I having our own sort of basic income because we're retired and we're okay, we had the time to be at the hospital and trying to find her a place to live at the end. Without that, and it would have been impossible, and even it was really difficult. And most families don't have that. My daughter gave birth in a hospital where her kids had to stay there for a week. She was the only mother who came to see her kids, because the other people in this neighborhood, they had other kids. They couldn't afford to come to the hospital. they couldn't afford the parking. And so that very early start to life was messed up. So I think we have a lot of work to do, and I think looking at the care agenda holistically is really important. The one last thing that I think I'd like to mention is how we may overlook self-care. And it's important that we are able to care for ourselves and be well if any of us are going to care for others, either in society, volunteer work, anything we do, or with our families. And I want to really stress the results that came out of the Ontario Basic Income Pilot in that regard. Results that we were expecting, but that still stunned us nonetheless. The dramatic decrease in depression, anxiety, and mental health problems. People getting off medications or significantly reducing them. So that connects to pharmacare. Great to have a pharmacare system, but we don't want to do it in a way that encourages people to need medication. So it helped that. There was less use of alcohol. There was less violence. And you find that in pilots around the world. This same pattern of well-being. And then you find people able to develop themselves, to care for others, to be better parents to their children, to be better employees, to be better citizens. So like all of this connects in so many ways. I think it really behooves us to look at it as an agenda with these different components.
Thank you. I want to come back to pharmacare in a minute, but I wonder if either you or Senator Pate could comment on one of the questions that have come in. What we haven't talked about in the care agenda, and I really, I'm remiss for not including that, is care for persons with disabilities, services that they may need. If either of you have thoughts on what the federal government or other governments should be doing in terms of advancing that part of the caring agenda.
Do you want to go first, Sheila?
No, I'm moving so I don't run out of battery.
Okay. Yeah, I think we definitely have to. I mean, when we think of, I mentioned earlier about the people who fall through the cracks or the gaping holes in our social and economic and health safety nets. We see them in prisons. We see people with disabling mental health issues who end up in prison because there's nowhere else for them. We see them on the streets. We see, we know they're dying as well. And so we need to be ensuring that we provide the opportunity for both people who want to live in location at their homes who have disabilities to have those supports in place, and also for people who want to care for their family members, whether it's their children or their, as has been already mentioned, or elderly, or people with family members or friends with disabilities, to be able to do that. And the current mechanisms don't allow for that, and it's part of what it needs to be part of the caring agenda, absolutely, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, one of the points made by one of the callers is that Australia has set the gold standard in disability supports and services through the creation of its National Disability Insurance Program. And there's quite a movement here in Canada to put that idea forward. As the poorest of the poor are, and with the highest rates of unemployment of any marginalized group, when will Canada look to adopt a similar plan for Canada? So I'll leave that there. And Sheila, if you've got a quick comment.
Yeah, so it's interesting that that actually is in the works. And so they're looking at the income part of the basic income benefit and then how it does interact with services and other things that people need. In the basic income movement, we kind of have mixed views of this. I mean, we are absolutely supportive of the need for people with disabilities to have better financial security and access to the services they need. And I think there may be ways in which developing this disability benefit may help. But we're also really concerned about the idea that it kind of sets up a deserving and undeserving poor dynamic that then doesn't help other people. One of the things that struck me most in an early meeting with people in the disability community, and I think it comes back to the self-care thing in a way. There were people there who did not have disabilities themselves, but they were caring for people with disabilities. And they said, where do we get help? Like, my relative is not going to be fine unless there's somebody there for them. And I can't do that if I'm, working constantly and stressed about my employment and all of these other things. So it's kind of like it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to care for people with disabilities, seniors, everybody. So it's that village approach I think we need to all of this.
And if I can just add, Andrew, one of the things
Okay.
that was,
Thank you.
oops, sorry. One of the things that horrified many of us when the Senate was looking at the medical assistance in dying provisions most recently introduced was the number of people with disabilities who were given no other option but to go into substandard care, if I can even describe it as that. And the fact that, we hadn't considered these sorts of options in order to provide meaningful opportunities for people to have a life, not just, to have a choice between a miserable, horrible existence and death. And so it was a huge debate for, as you're probably aware, for many of us in the Senate around this issue. And the disability community was very clear that they were extremely concerned that we were opening up medical assistance in dying without first ensuring that we had the supports in place for people to live.
Yeah. Senator, if I can just ask you a quick comment on one aspect of basic income. Has the CERB given us more information about how a basic income system would work?
It's given us some information, and this I will defer to Sheila because they've done, it's the work that Basic Income Now and Sheila's group have been working on that tells us the difference. So I'll pass it to Sheila because I think it tells us that if you provide people with money, they, they can be better off and they can survive in, increasingly inhospitable systems. Most of us who had the privilege of a job and ongoing income have done relatively okay during this pandemic. It's the people who got nothing that haven't done well, and that includes people who weren't eligible for CERB.
Right. Just quickly, Sheila, your thoughts about the CERB?
I was at a presentation recently done by Andrew Heiss at Statistics Canada, and he was looking particularly at the experience of Black, Indigenous people of color and how they fared. It might have just been around Ontario, I'm not sure, but it showed the impact that getting CERB really had on people in reducing inequality in a way that nothing prior to the pandemic had done. It's clear that it did that. But as Kim said, those who needed it the most were the ones who were excluded. So that's where you see, I mean, in Toronto, the infection and death rates were terrible. So there was good learning from CERB, but it had a lot of flaws in design that are fixable, really fixable, and we should take that learning and move forward.
Yeah, and it was put together really fast, which is another example of how governments can actually sometimes move really fast and get things more or less right. Scott, I want to switch gears a bit and talk about the politics. Jane Bertrand mentioned at the start that the first recommendations for national childcare were made about 50 years ago. And you talked about the Paul Martin effort about 10 years ago. What are your thoughts about how these things develop in the political system? What's your advice to people who want to advance any of these caring agenda items?
I think a lot of it, I would say to people, if they have a specific concern about how they fall through a hole or a gap or a gaping hole, as Senator Pate put it, which is true, I think what you can do is that you can look to your local representative, whoever that may be, and that's just not your MP, but that's your MPP, your MHA, so on and so forth, and bring to them the issue of how it was specific to you and how you failed to take advantage of a system that was meant for you. Case in point, for years we had asked the federal government to expand the EI eligibility for sickness. It was only at a 15-week benefit If a person worked the requisite amount of hours and was in perfect health, they would get close to a year in benefit. But if they became ill and could not work, they could only receive 15. It was absolutely, it was horrendous. And how this was not addressed, I don't know. Now, recently the government it has to go further, in my opinion. But it took so long to get to that point where it was actually, and I use this word quite a bit when it comes to politics, which is tangible. Politicians, primarily backbenchers, which mean a lot to our system, as I experienced through 17 years, politicians have to feel that it's a tangible issue in order for them to push that much further. Through private members' bills is a wonderful way by which that you can change things in, albeit a small way on a national level, but a very big way to a certain group of people out there. And that goes for the entire caring agenda. If you know of something that you have fallen through and because of your unique circumstance, you do not qualify. Let's use a recent example where some seniors who went on CERB are now not eligible for drug care back home, right? That's a perfect example. Now, CERB may not be a good example because it was put through and a lot of things were not conceived of at the time. But now we've done it. And now we can go back and say to ourselves, look, if this is an issue, one of the things you can say to your local member is, why don't you do a private members bill to fix this? All it takes is about 3 lines in any particular legislation to do. And now that we're in a minority, that gives it a unique circumstance by which you can pass these things and vastly improve the caring agenda. Again, they may be small things on paper, but they can vastly improve all these wonderful objectives, whether they be seniors, early childhood education, and certainly when it comes to what is likely to be a precursor to the basic income, in my humble opinion, because now you could do a lot of the fixes beforehand. So again, to summarize, just whatever your circumstance is and how the problems are encapsulated in a caring agenda, make it tangible to people in power, people that you vote for.
Hello.
Right. Can you talk briefly about the rough and tumble of politics in terms of what happens in a caucus or a cabinet or the parliament? How do issues move ahead or not move ahead beyond what you've just mentioned?
The most obvious struggle within the context of a caucus and what I just mentioned about all these little things that happen, I'll give you another example. I had a private members bill about 10 years ago, and it allowed seniors above the age of 65 to receive old age security. They have a choice. They can either receive it once a month, which they currently do, or twice a month. No extra money, really. I would love to have extra money, but all it did was, because we had received input from a lot of seniors groups that said, if you pay us twice a month, it helps us budgeting for whatever old age security we receive right now. Now, my bill failed because it didn't, but the problem was, and this is typical of anything that you want to do that may seem small, but it's tangible to people, is that your incentive to improve the caring agenda runs up against the public treasury. And I say that because the government wants to give, as an executive, as the cabinet, they want to give as much as they can without putting, a greater load on the deficit. So the other stuff that arises at the last minute gets put aside, unless you force a vote in the House. Now that we have a minority, this is where it gets a little bit dicey, it gets a little bit difficult, but it's well worth the exercise, because in the rough and tumble of it, that's generally what you have, is a great incentive to improve the country, healthcare being one of them. If you go back to look at the early 60s and the arguments of why healthcare, a national healthcare system should not be adopted, the reasons are insane as to why. Because you won't attract doctors was one of the reasons, or you won't, it's absurd to look at now, but at the time, the government put up what it could so that it wouldn't lose as much from the public treasury and throw its plans off the rails.
Yeah.
That's really the tussle that we have in caucus for the most part.
Yeah, and certainly if you look at childcare, I mean, it almost happened 10 years ago, and it didn't. And a session we had a few years ago, Sharon Schultzberg Gray, who has been around healthcare for a long time, was telling us about a backroom story in the Liberal caucus in the Pearson days, where in, I guess it was 1967 or so, the caucus had agreed to put forward Medicare, and at the last minute, Mitchell Sharp, who was the finance minister, pulled it off. And there was a revolt in the caucus in the last day before the budget and put it back on. And you think about something like that, we think of it, you know, it's always been there, but it hasn't always been there. And if it didn't happen in that budget, it may not have happened for another decade or whatever. So these things, so that rough and tumble is kind of important. Senator Kim Pate, you've, speaking about rough and tumble, of politics, you've been able to move some of these issues forward. What's your advice to people as to how to work through the political system to get these any issues ahead?
Well, to be clear, I'm just still trying to figure that out because, you know, it's very kind of you to say that we've made progress. I think there's lots of good discussion, but we haven't actually seen the progress move. And, you know, I've tried everything from a hoist motion, which everybody was really irritated with me about in the Senate last year, just before the holidays, because poor people were still not being considered in all of the financial provisions. I do find, you know, I've spent more time in this past year reaching out and being reached out to by young people and their challenges to push us in the way that Scott talked about, to recognize that, you know, part of our responsibility, we say it's minority interests as well as regional interests in the Senate. And they said, don't call it minority interest, call it the intentionally ignored. These are the folks that the people generally running for office don't seem to be concerned about because they're not big vote getters. And these are policy decisions that we have to figure out how to bring the pressure on. And so, you know, quite frankly, the advice from all of you is really helpful to me because we're trying it every, you know, a number of different ways. We've got private bills, we've got motions, we've got studies we're trying to get. And, you know, lest that sound like a just, you know, a random approach, it's we're trying to figure out how do we plug all of these holes that get the awareness to the point that people say we have to act. It's beyond time that we act in the way that it happened for Medicare and the way that it happened for childcare. And so we need to, I think the fact that you have characterized this session as about a caring agenda as opposed to just one of the issues, I think is vitally important. That's exactly the message many of us are trying to get out to whoever we're talking to, whether it's my colleagues in the Senate, whether it's members of Parliament, whether it's the general public, that really without, you know, and I often use the example of, you know, oil, what we allowed to have happen with oil in Canada, in Alberta, when in Finland, they did a very different approach. When they got oil about the same time as Alberta did, roughly the same geographic size, roughly the same population numbers, but they invested all of the resources in as a community well-being and community wealth, so that I'm told you can go to even the most remote fjord in Finland, and you can have access to healthcare, education, social supports, housing, and they have enough money in their coffers that they could actually take care of everybody who's alive right now until they die. That's the kind of support. So that makes for, as Sheila's already mentioned, happier people, a greater well-being, healthier people. And why wouldn't we want that for everybody, not just the richest?
Okay, I'm going to ask everybody, we're almost out of time, for a 1-minute answer on a question of that's come in. Which says, all sounds great. How do we pay for this? Before we get to that, I'm going to ask Scott one other question. So that'll be your closing comment. But I have one quick question. You also have a minute to answer this, Scott, which is, so the question is, has the government and Parliament abandoned pharmacare?
Not yet. I'm Pollyannic enough to think that it hasn't. I think that there's a lot to do with the provinces. I know that, I realize that, and that seems to be like an answer that we give because we want to get away from something, an issue. But I think that if you look at the temperature of the public, it is a sharp demand. President Biden said it yesterday, and I thought it was really good. He quoted a person that's approached him about her type 1 diabetes. And she said, "For once in my life, I would like to make a decision about my future that doesn't include diabetes." And I thought, you know, if that doesn't impact politicians or anyone decision making, that this is a serious issue, especially now with the aging population, I don't know what is. And there has to be that answer that's out there. And I think it is,
Yeah.
but that you have to have the patience and you have to have the compulsion to do it. And I think that's
And
necessary.
on something big like that, is it better to go for a partial pharmacare, so by age group or by certain drugs? Is it
I
better to
think
go
so.
step by step?
Yeah, sure. I think that's, you know, I think there has to be the one issue that's most easy. I know it's the often said term, but it's often the low-hanging fruit. I think a lot of the issues around pharmacare, there can be a vanguard out there that allows us to get into a more comprehensive way of covering people on drug coverage. Maybe catastrophic drug coverage could be one of those places. The immense amount of money that is involved in caring for yourself if you have a rare disease is incredible. And that may be a start, but I agree. I think you don't need the whole package to start with. You just need a vanguard to get things moving.
Yeah. So, and interestingly, in Ontario, Kathleen Wynne brought in pharmacare for people until the age of 25, but unfortunately, the next government dropped that. So, but it certainly to me is an example of how these things can be done. So, 1 minute to each of you. The question again is: all sounds great. How do we pay for this? Jane, Bertrand, I'll start with you.
Okay, I'm going to combine it with a message that Margaret McCain asked me to deliver to the group. She is delighted that the federal government has taken this bold step forward, and now the provinces and territories are joining in. The investment will pay for itself now and in the long term. We've got lots of evidence about that, and it is crucial. It is a crucial investment to prepare our world, the place where we live, for the future. I could go on, but I think we're running out of time.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thanks so much. Sheila Reguer, in a minute. How do we pay for this?
Okay, so I would say two things. First of all, any of this only looks expensive if you think what we have now is free. If you think putting people in prison because there's no other place for them, if you think letting people die in horrible circumstances, if we have uneducated, if that isn't costing us, then we're delusional. Excuse me, I can't get something with my throat. And then the second thing that I would say to people is, where do you think the money is going? We're not losing it. It goes directly back into the economy, and what you need is money circulating in the economy.
Yeah, thank you. Senator Pate.
I agree with Sheila, and I think too often we want a perfect alternative, and while we've got failing systems all around us, and we don't challenge those very systems that are costing us tens and hundreds of billions of dollars and are actually putting more and more people into more abject poverty. I think we need to rethink the way we look at this. Parliamentary Budget Officer has done some costing. Sheila's group has done some costing. There's all kinds of ways this can be paid for, and ultimately we can see that it actually pays for, essentially pays for itself, much the way we're seeing, yes, we invest in childcare up front and we'll get the benefits down the road. We put in Medicare, we get the benefits down the road. We put in pharmacare, we put in disability care, on, and housing. And so we need to look to those countries that have done this and look at the well-being indexes, not just the GDP, as to how they recognize and measure their growth.
Thank you. And Scott, your thoughts about how do we pay for this?
It's nice to hear we hear terms about basic corporate tax that is now going around the world. I just think the right people should start paying. I agree with Jane and Senator Pate and Sheila on the it pays for itself message, yes, but if I could add to it, it's like some people need to pay a bit more in our society. And this is what we have to consider. It's like how we try to lure certain people in this country when on a business scale, on a corporate scale. That's great and fine, but I think you have to make these people help pay for our systems and funnel that money towards something that is an essential benefit. And the benefit is not just dollars. The benefit is also about the caring agenda and how you monetize that.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. Jane, Bertrand, thank you to you for the work you've done for so long on childcare, to you and to Margaret McCain. Sheila Reguer, thank you for your leadership on basic income and the other issues around welfare. Senator Pate, thank you to you too on this issue and many others, and for making time for us today when you've got 3 other speeches to deliver on various topics. I don't know how you do it all, but yay. Scott Sims, thank you for your 17 years of public service to Canada and to your constituents, and for carrying on sharing your wisdom and experience with us, because I think that's really how we can learn more about how our systems work. I just want to tell our audience we've got 3 more sessions today. At 1 o'clock, we'll be hearing from Tom Jackson, the great musician and singer, who'll be talking about Indigenous advancement with Professor Gahante Hornmiller of Carleton University. At 3:30, we have a session on economic recovery and growth with Peggy Nash, Brian Kingston, and Professor Ian Lee and Don Arsenault. And at the end of the day, at 4 o'clock, we have a conversation on Prairie and Western issues with the Honorable Jim Carr in conversation with Sandra Pupatella. So please join us for these sessions and more tomorrow. Again, thank you all of you. I know that people are going to be very happy with, pleased with what you've shared with us today. You can't hear them applaud. So what I'll do is ask you to be clapping for each other as we sign off. So thanks very much, all of you.
Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for hosting this.
It's great, Andy. Thank you.
It was great. Thank you.